Hello and welcome to That's Not Spit, It's Condensation. I'm Ryan Beach, and today I'm really excited to be able to chat with Doug McVey, the founder and mouthpiece engineer at Vennture Mouthpieces. I first became aware of Doug's company from some friends of mine who work with Doug, and the premise of it is very interesting. If you haven't heard about it, we're obviously going to get into it. But if you know about Vennture, the idea that you can see what's going on with your mouthpiece and tinker with things and get different blanks and prototypes and actually really get into the nitty gritty and customization of your own equipment is a very interesting proposition that I'm excited to learn more about where it came from. And maybe even find some suggestions for myself. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. But Doug, I really appreciate you giving me some of your time and doing this interview with me today. Thank you.
You're most welcome. It's my pleasure to be here. And anytime you want to think about a design, I'm always down for a fitting.
Sweet. Well, that will be probably a different time. For now, we're going to focus on you, I think. And why don't we just start kind of with your background, maybe your background with Trumpet, your background with engineering. I know these are two passions in your life. And so you just kind of want to give us a generalized look into your background.
Yeah, well, so I played trumpet growing up. I started when I was 7 years old, like a lot of people do. And I played in school, and I sort of never gave it up. I just kept playing through college. And then afterwards, played with some cover bands. And most recently, my main gig is probably the chairman of the board, playing trumpet with them down here in the Carolina beach music scene. But I was lucky enough when I was in 8th grade middle school that my band director was a Berklee College of Music grad and also a Jerome Callett student. So he taught me, some what Callett taught, super chops. And being as I was on Long Island, it wasn't too far to go into the city. So I studied with Jerome a little bit in the city in Staten Island. And part of my origin story, I guess, would be one time when I went in to take a lesson with him. He was working on a mouthpiece on his lathe, and that sort of sparked my interest. I was 12 at the time, and I thought it was really neat, watching him make something out of a piece of stock. And so something about that stuck with me years later as I, had the capacity to do something about it.
Nice.
So
what about the engineering side of things? I know you have a degree in engineering, right?
That's right. So I went to Amherst College in undergrad and studied chemistry and math and a lot of physics. And then I did a Master of Engineering at Cornell. And so I have a advanced degree in applied and engineering physics from Cornell. And after that, I worked in the semiconductor industry for a few years and then started my own automation firm. We built all sorts of automated equipment, robotic test cells, a lot of it for the defense industry, some for semiconductors, for biotech. And I ran that until about 5 years ago when I decided to go off on my own and try something new.
Wow. So mouthpiece design wasn't necessarily where your head was at immediately leaving the engineering studies that you were doing. You actually went off and did the thing that most people would imagine you would do.
Yeah, I went off and started an automation business. My career in semiconductors, I was there for a few years, and I realized I liked automation and designing equipment and machinery more than I liked semiconductors. And so I went full time into the designing of equipment and machinery. And so you could argue that Vennture is really just the second automation company that I've started. I don't think of it primarily as designing mouthpieces. I think of it as building the tools with which to take a mouthpiece idea from scanning of a physical thing that you have in front of you that you're familiar with to the CAD environment, comparing that thing to other things and tweaking it into something else. And then the manufacturing environment, whether it be out of metal on a lathe or whether it be 3D printed.
Nice. Yeah, I guess I asked that question it kind of shows my bias. Like oftentimes I feel like I think about music as we're this separate thing. It's very specific to what we do, but even just hearing you say it, it's like engineering can be applied to anything. It's not like, well, there are certain jobs that are engineering and then there's these other things that aren't, it's really interesting to think that you just combine these two passions or these two things that you really enjoy doing, but you weren't necessarily thinking like, I got to get back into music. You were just like, this is a thing I enjoy, and I went in that direction.
Yeah, it's another application of engineering. And to me, most of my job is engineering. As I said, building those tools. And sometimes it's using the tools myself, and sometimes it's empowering other people, people who work for me, people who are, end users, musicians who want to, employ these tools to learn about mouthpieces, to design mouthpieces, to test mouthpieces, and ultimately to acquire, metal mouthpieces.
Yeah. Is there like so even just getting right into it, talking about Vennture, is there some sort of deep, meaningful story about how you had the idea to do what you're doing with Vennture? Or is it just kind of like pop in your head one day and you're like, that sounds kind of interesting, maybe I'll check that out?
Well, it's funny. I think that I didn't get into mouthpieces as deeply as you might imagine. Some people have dozens, hundreds, suitcases full of mouthpieces. And I had a very low average number. I probably, from the time I started with my Box 7C, which by the way is a terrible idea, until, I started Vennture, I probably owned fewer than a dozen total over, a couple of decades. And that's not that many, in the grand scheme of that sort of thing. And the reason I didn't was simply because I didn't want to do it if I couldn't do it my way. To me, because it would just be grabbing this mouthpiece, grabbing that, and the systematic way that I would ever think about something like that is really just a curve. What if I varied one thing about it when I had wanted to test it? I couldn't do that, with the tools that were out there. And so I just didn't bother. I found something that worked kind of well enough and stuck with it for years. And then, I, like some people do, slowly evolved, but it was never very central because it wasn't something where I felt like I could do it how I wanted to. And I've met people like that who have some curiosity, but haven't had a way to, scratch that itch in a systematic and meaningful way, other than just randomly, buying the odd mouthpiece. And so that wasn't what they focused on. And, they are far from being optimally fit for their mouthpiece. And I was optimally far from that sort of optimal fit before I started Vennture. So, but the way that it popped into my head is there were a couple of businesses that I drew inspiration from. One was, here, if you indulge me for just 1 second.
Of course.
So our big new product we launched recently, and this isn't a marketing thing, I promise you, but our Fit Kit, let me see, where you can get a mail order, kit of parts, right? But don't worry about the mouthpieces. Focus on the kit, on the box itself. You see, it's got cutouts for all the pieces, and it's got, writing and all that. And where that box comes from, it's called mycasebuilder.com. And if you go on there, they have a piece of CAD software, and you can draw out where you want the cutouts and how deep each cutout is, and where you want the finger holds, and where you want the writing, and they'll make it for you.
Yeah.
And there was a similar service called CaseCAD, where like electronics cases, like the computer cases and things, or electronics boxes, you can draw what you want for your PCB or your electronics project, and draw the screen printing or whatever, and they'll make it for you. And somewhere along the lines of using those in my other business, I thought, wouldn't that be cool for mouthpieces? Yeah, and that was the idea right there. If you can draw what you want in a case like that, and then have it made, why not be able to draw what you want for a mouthpiece and have it made in a reasonable amount of time for a reasonable amount of money, and then be able to have it, this digital record of it, and evolve it and tweak it. Like I have, if I decide I want to add another backbore in that case, I would start with the case drawing that I have and add another little slot.
Sure.
And evolve it forward. Or if I run out of them, or I want more cases, I just reorder, and that digital record, I don't have to start from scratch with a knife every time cutting foam. And so that's that was the genesis of the idea.
I think that's so cool. I mean, it sort of speaks to an idea I've had where when things look like innovation, like it's this new idea, oftentimes it's not necessarily a brand new idea, but a merging of two ideas that they seem separate from each other, but you, in this particular instance, found a way to combine these two different ideas, being able to custom fit something and mouthpieces, which, like you said, everybody before is just going through the Safari. We have a billion mouthpieces because we liked it for a week, and then, the honeymoon period is over, and so we're done with it, or anything like that. Or like what I did right now, I'm playing some mouthpieces that they're Toshi mouthpieces. And a friend of mine, I was interested in trying them because players that I respect play on them. And I was like, I don't really know what to order. So my friend who's got a connection was like, well, what did you play? And I was like, I play this Hammond. And he's like, okay. And then he just ordered me 2 mouthpieces to try, right? Like it was like sort of what we would imagine as a close approximation. But obviously what you're doing is, can be and is more precise, given that you can just scan what people are currently working with and then talk about what they are unhappy with.
Which is exactly it. The ability to have someone play a mouthpiece or two. I often talk about your current mouthpiece and 1 or 2 before that, and if I can know what those all were and why you're not using the others and why you are using this one, I can usually just draw something that'll be perfect. Because you're usually looking for something. I like this one, but, and whatever comes after the but is what I want to hear. Something about intonation, something about tone color, something about upper register, something about comfort of the rim, something about endurance, all those things. And then I think, okay, what were they looking for when they broke up with that mouthpiece and got together with this mouthpiece, and then so on. And as I trace that sort of, that curve through time, that path, then where does it lead next? And then we can iterate forward. So I think the central problem of Mouthpiece is that it took me a few years to really sort of be able to articulate it. It's the Combinatorics problem, right? If you have 3 colors of shirt and 2 and 4 sizes and with or without a pocket, you're multiplying 3 by 4 by 2, to find the number of different shirts you have to carry to have all those variations covered. With mouthpieces, if there's, 10 or more discrete sort of rough diameter sizes and 5 or 10 different rim shapes and, 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different cup depths, you start multiplying those out and all of a sudden you're into the millions or billions, depending, how you count it.
Right.
And the same mouthpiece with, different throats will play differently. So again, multiply by 10 again and multiply by, 10 or 20 or 50 different backbores and multiply by all the different reeve sleeve, gap sizes and multiply by different rough weights of the outer blank, because something heavyweight will play difference than something that's skeletonized. And now you've got millions, billions, huge numbers. And when you jump from one mouthpiece to another, you're not changing one thing, you're changing a bunch of things.
Right.
Right. And so typically you're taking 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And eventually you'll end up with 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And that's your new mouthpiece.
Right.
Right. Whereas I believe in 1 or 2 steps forward and 0 steps back, and testing 1 or 2 things and dialing in. So that Combinatorics problem is the reason why people go on safaris, because you can't just get a deeper version of, in a lot of manufacturers, a Bach 3C, a 3E is not a shallower version of a 3C. The rim is completely different. The backbore is completely different, and so it plays it is shallower, but it's also very, very, very different. And so it's not apples to apples, and so the inability to be systematic is why people go on safaris. Actually, I went on safari in South Africa once. It's kind of interesting. The guides have this language that they speak. It's some sort of amalgam of Afrikaans and English and a couple of local languages, and it's pretty much unintelligible to anyone except them. And as they're guiding people around in their little safari vehicles, this team of guides, they'll be talking back and forth about what they're seeing, and you can't really understand what they're saying. But one of them, they'll be saying, I think I see lion droppings here. I think I see evidence of elephants here, and then you'll sort of follow the other guides around. On safari, there's no really good systematic way. It's not like going to the zoo. You just wander around hoping to run into the things you're trying to see. But, I'm looking for a zoo experience, not a safari. It's time to see a lion now. Okay, there's the lion cage. Take a picture, check, move on. Now we're going to see the elephants. And when you get to that cage, there it's going to be. And if you wonder, do I think leopards or cheetahs are prettier? Well, I guess I just go back and forth between the two cages and say, oh, actually, I like leopards.
Yeah.
And that's
the ability to. I was going to say the ability to like directly get to the heart of like, well, this is this exact thing every time, and this is this exact thing, and now I can begin to compare two things, being a more efficient way to find out what will or won't work, as opposed to like, let me just kind of see what I can find. That seems to be the analogy you're drawing.
Absolutely.
So then, how are you at Vennture Mouthpieces aiming to solve this problem of the Mouthpiece Safari?
So the thing is, as it turns out, for years now, I mean, since we released VenCAD 5 years ago, we had the tool that was necessary. VenCAD is absolutely the right tool. The problem is how to deploy that tool, and that's the problem we've been facing ever since. If someone sits down with VenCAD and learns to use it, their ability to succeed is very high. Like, we've proven that over and over. The problem is, how do you get someone to sit down and learn a piece of software that's, kind of complicated? And so we've had different sorts of approaches. And the answer is there's no one approach. There's several that have worked, right? One is we just leave VenCAD up there for people to download. And there are plenty of people who download VenCAD. They're good at it. And some of them, every month or two or three, I get another order from them. A different idea of theirs, a different instrument. They want to take their main, rim and put it on a flugelhorn mouthpiece. And, they are slowly, systematically replacing their entire collection with Vennture stuff that they designed themselves. That was sort of the vision that I had, because that's how I used the case CAD or whatever to design. I designed a case and it came, but there's other ways to get that done. Our shamans, we call them mouthpiece shamans, our sales force, our consultants can talk with people and then help them walk through and decide what they want and do the sketches for them and so forth. So that's another way of deploying that tool. Another way of deploying the tool isn't just drawing it and getting a mouthpiece in brass, it's 3D printing. And some of these shamans have, made a cottage industry out of, if someone designed their own thing in VenCAD, 3D printing it, or helping them to make designs and then testing them in 3D prints and then sending me the file to make, in the end. And the more recent thing that we've been pushing on has been these mouthpiece kits, where it turns out people still want stock models, but my stock models aren't going to be like everyone else's. I'm going to, if you ask me, what do you have that's like a 3C? That kit I just showed you was all roughly 3C size stuff. That's one rough rim size, but it's 1,500 different combinations within that rim size, different rim profiles, of the same nominal size, and different cup depths and different throats and different backbores to allow people to dial in something like what they want, whether that's the thing that they end up wanting or whether that's the starting point for then an in-between size or that same thing, but with a Bach number 24 backbore or what have you.
Yeah.
So the answer, there's no one easy, straightforward way. That's the problem with having all the options in the world. It's not like, well, these are the 10 models I make, buzz into all of them and tell me which one you want. It's, I make infinite models.
Yeah.
And so to sort of get it, we're able to service anyone from, I kind of know what I want to combine this rim and this cup and this backbore. Could you help me with a throat? To, I have no idea what I want. Well, now you have this kit, which is very systematic. Start by finding a rim that fits, and then, try different cup depths, and then dial the throat, then dial the backbore, then go back and, reiterate a couple times till you found your fit. And in that way, we've been able to help very different sorts of people, from hardcore mouthpiece nerds who actually think it's a good time to download software and mess around with it, and do that deep dive, all the way to people who say, I don't really like mouthpieces. It seems like it's it's Pandora's box. I don't want to go in there. It's scary. I haven't changed mouthpieces in 15 or 20 years. And things like the kits, they find actually very appealing because it's systematic. You don't have to just start willy-nilly buying stuff from all over the place and hoping it works. You go through and test until something feels right, until something sounds right, until something is right.
Yeah. This is all amazing to think of how many ways you've considered what is the best way to get this tool in the hands of people to help them the best. I want to take just one step back. If you could explain what VennCAD is, because I've got a picture in my head of what it is, but I feel like you giving a full-bodied explanation of what the program is, how it works. Because I know that I remember when I was in high school hearing about this software related to, I don't even remember, it was like maybe cars or design, like certain things with, I don't remember exactly what it was. Long story short, my assumption is, like you said, with the, the box kit thing, for cutting things out, like this software exists for lots of different things, but I'm not sure. And maybe someone listening may not be exactly sure what the CAD software is. So if you could just kind of explain that, that'd be great.
Right. So CAD stands for computer aided design, and it's used in all sorts of different industries. But generally what you're doing is drawing some sort of picture and then using that to compare it to other pictures and modify it. Like AutoCAD is probably the best known in the industry, and there are 3D ones like SolidWorks and Inventor. But I wanted to do something that is custom to and tailored for mouthpieces. So basically, what it is it's exactly what any CAD user would guess it would be. It's the ability to view mouthpieces in cross section together with other mouthpieces. If I ask you to sketch on a napkin, what does the cross section of your mouthpiece look like? You probably wouldn't do a very good job because it's sort of unknown. You gaze into it, and it's hard to get a sense of. It literally is a funhouse mirror. The bowl of the cup is a funhouse mirror. You can't really measure it accurately without measuring it. So VennCAD, seeks to allow people to, and I'll bring it up for a minute here. I know there are some people listening on audio. This maybe will, inspire you to download it. But I just mentioned, for example, about the Bach 3C and the Bach 3E. And I have...
for those who are listening, he's using VennCAD and pulling up two different designs of a Bach 3C and a Bach 3E to show what the differences are like between the two of them.
And immediately you'll see that, in fact, the cup of the green 3E is, in fact, shallower.
Mm-hmm.
But the rim is very different.
Yeah, I mean, on this, it looks like it's so subtle, but that would mean a large discrepancy, those sort of subtle differences?
Well, that might look like a subtle difference, but I will bring up for reference a 1.5C. People think of a 1.5C and a 3C as being fairly far apart, and they are. So now that's the difference between in red of 3C and in blue a 1.5C. Mm-hmm. That 3E, look at that thing.
Oh yeah, wow.
The 3E actually, at this where that yellow cursor is, feels bigger than a 1.5C.
Yeah, it's like a wider rim, but a shallower cup.
Exactly. And whereas you can see that the 1.5 and the 3, they're sort of parallel to each other in the bite region of the cup. The 3E is much more gently sloped.
Sure.
That's why you bottom out on it. People say, I had a 3C and I tried a 3D or a 3E and I bottomed out on it. So I'm not a shallow mouthpiece person. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the problem. The problem is the shallow mouthpiece they're trying.
I mean, that's a whole nother, as you know, a whole nother can of worms, so to speak. So
that's the basic idea of VennCAD is you can look at those things next to each other and start to understand immediately. I can see you're doing the math. You're imagining in your head what those feel like. You've probably played you've tried a 3C, a 1.5C, and you're imagining the difference in feel, and you're starting to calibrate your eye to the 1.5 feels bigger. How much does that look like on the screen? It really doesn't look like very much, but it is, and And then the really cool and powerful thing is to be able to then go in and say, well, I can actually make the thing that I want. I can start with that 3C and I can just make it a good bit shallower.
Yeah. So for audio listeners, he's in VennCAD. He's actually right now designing and moving these lines around to make it's essentially you're taking a 3C, right? And
Yep.
you're actually, instead of like changing anything about the rim or whatever, you're just changing the cup.
Exactly. So now the rims will match perfectly, but the cup will be shallower.
So it should feel the same on your lips. It'll just have the differences that a shallower cup would bring.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And I'm just sort of doing a little housekeeping here because it's a weird design, the 3C is. And then, so now you have your shallower version, your deeper version. And the cool part about that is, and we can take the back bore here just so that I have a back. This is how quick it can be to design a thing, and now I have a thing. And if I save that file, you can send it to me and I can make that out of brass. And if you have a 3D printer, you can make an STL file, which a 3D printing person would know is all you need to 3D print with. And boom, you can send this to the 3D printer and try it.
So for audio listeners, we went from you just are looking at the cup and the backbore and things. There's just like literally just two lines on opposite sides. And then now we're looking at what looks like an actual mouthpiece on the design. And then he just clicked a couple of buttons. And then we were looking at like a model for a 3D printed mouthpiece. So it looks like this process can happen quite quickly.
Absolutely.
If you just said you wanted a shallower version, and the problem, of course, is, well, how shallow do you want it? And
right.
The answer then is, well, I've tried a 13A, 4A. That's too shallow. Give me something in between. Well, now you can bring up the other thing that's too shallow, and you can go in between them. And now you've got, boundaries with which to, guide your design. So that is the power of VennCAD. And VennCAD actually is what allowed me to make all these kits to come apart in the right places and, to all to go together correctly. VennCAD is what was used to design all of these. And there are mouthpiece makers now who are using VennCAD in their own internal design. Certainly all of my shamans use it. So it is this really robust tool because you can go faster than anywhere ever before. You can go from a physical thing. I can scan it in minutes. It can be then in VennCAD. And then once we've got our design, it can be taken from VennCAD to the 3D printer or to the lathe in a second or two, which is unprecedented.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question that's on my mind right now, I don't feel like this is even like a logical jump. It's just on my mind. So you've been working with this for a while. You've been working with CAD software for your career probably, but like for this, using VennCAD for mouthpieces, do you feel like you're using it like maximally and you'll just keep using it? Or do you feel like there are ways that this software can be used that you haven't discovered yet that's going to change the game again? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, the software, it took me like several solid months to go from the idea to a functioning prototype of VennCAD. And I have been refining it, like the 3D printing was a big innovation 3 or so years ago, whenever it was. So there are a few jumps that I think could happen that will make it, even better. But really, I think that the bigger problem is just figuring out how to get people into it, whether it be them using it or, right now I'm trying to recruit some new shamans who have good sales contacts who can, work with their friends and their colleagues, in fitting. Deploying the tools that I have has been the work of the last year, and will continue to be the primary thrust of what I'm doing, rather than the tools are good enough as they are. Sure, there's always bug fixes and little upgrades, but my primary focus right now is getting this into the hands of more people, be it by them using it or other people using it on their behalf or with them. That is the hard part. I'm painfully aware that that Betamax was better than VHS. The technology was better, but it didn't win because marketing.
Yeah.
So that's my thing.
Do you feel like? So you said that there's some people who have they've downloaded VennCAD and they take the time to learn it, and things like that. And then there's other people who are, working with your shamans to be able to get questions answered and have them help. What is somewhat like, if there is a way to generalize this, what is someone's like experience when they are finished, quote, finished with a process of designing a mouthpiece? Do you get the sense that people are like, how could I go back to just randomly choosing a mouthpiece? Like, are they, Vennture mouthpiece, like not loyalists, but you get what I'm saying? Like, do they feel like this is the only way forward? Or do you feel like people are kind of ambivalent towards the process when they're finished?
When people, the hard part is getting them into the process, because there's a certain amount of, activation energy, as we call it in chemistry, getting over the hump to, but once they have done it once, I think that those customers are very sticky in our ecosystem.
Yeah, I would have to imagine that have to be the case. Like, because you once you see with the possibility of how customized and how you could change one variable at a time, like how could you go back to doing it the other way?
I think most people don't. But we have people who have ordered literally dozens.
Yeah.
They've replaced their whole collection once or twice. Because they want it their way. And yeah, if you've dialed something in to be perfect, you're imagining a year or two from now when you buy a new horn that plays a little differently, and you're like, okay, this thing is pretty much what I want, but I need a different mount. We need to do something with the backboard to bring the intonation back. Do you really want to then start right from, let's try a random thing and see if it works? Or do you want to take the thing that is known good? And so I have likened the mouthpiece process now to the way that we treat knowledge and documents, right? It used to be in the Middle Ages that if you wanted a book, a monk would have to like hand copy it. And you'd have a library of so many, if you were a rich person, you'd have a dozen books or whatever. And if you couldn't find the book you wanted, you were kind of out of luck, And if you wanted to make edits to a book or, write a new book, well, then you had to find another monk and so forth. Now, we don't think about the paper that it's printed on as being particularly valuable. We think about the knowledge, it's in a document. And if we want to edit it, we can edit it. If we need it in hard copy, we print it. And there it is. And if we lose it, we print another one. And then we tailor it again when we have to write a similar document. We start with that as a starting point, and then we print it out as necessary. People think about mouthpieces as if they were those, medieval books copied by monks with all these grand flourishes, and they're precious. And, but to me, a mouthpiece is just a thing that is the embodiment of some knowledge that we have. And if you lose it, you should have that knowledge in my case, in a file, to be able to generate another one. And if you're not happy with it for whatever reason, you should have the ability to start there and then evolve it forward. The way you would with a Word doc, you wouldn't, recopy out a whole nother thing in longhand by a monk. If you wanted to change one chapter, you would just go in and you'd edit. And you could print as many copies as you want. And if you wanted all your friends to have one, you'd go to Kinko's, and now you'd have 5 copies. Well, that's the whole Vennture ethos, is the design idea, the knowledge that you've had to acquire should be yours. You should be able to keep it and then, evolve it forward, as opposed to, people, this mouthpiece is precious. I like the rim. Okay, let's cut it off and thread it and put it on something else. But don't ever lose that rim because it's precious. Well, no, it's just a curve. As long as we have it scanned and in VenCAD, well, then we have it. If we want to use it again, we just make it again.
So the next most logical question is, because I feel like even with you say, I'm going to scan it so we have literally exactly what your mouthpiece is, there could still be this potential fear that there's something mysterious or mystical about this mouthpiece. And even if you copied it exactly, somehow it wouldn't be exactly the same. Have you experienced that? Or when you copy people's mouthpieces, do they say, this is exactly the same, it's great?
Generally, people think that it's exactly the same, except when they don't. Here's a favorite story of mine that happened. This very accomplished player sent me a mouthpiece to copy, and I copied it. And I sent it back, and he said, I feel like it's not the same. It doesn't feel, the rim doesn't feel the same. And I said, really? I said, well, you know what? Send me back the original and the copy, and let me just check my work. It's possible I did something wrong. I don't know. And I scanned it and I called him back and I said, I was worried that I had not done good work on this mouthpiece. And in fact, I did not do good work. I did exceptional work. The copy was perfect. But I said, here's a picture. Your original is from like the 1950s. It's all pitted and, and worn, and the new one is new. And so what you're feeling isn't actually a difference in the geometry. It's just the surface finish. The old surface finish is rough, the new one's smooth. Shall we roughen yours? And, I've come up with ways to do this with bead blasting, with a different buffing process, So, of course, you can never make it perfect, like down to the there's millions of. If you look in a magnifying glass at an old mouthpiece, you'll be horrified. There are all these little micro pits where you can imagine disgustingness living.
Sure.
A lot of people's silver allergies are actually allergies to nastiness and disgustingness and micro abrasions from all these little pits in their mouthpiece. So, getting things freshly plated or keeping it clean with a little alcohol or something does wonders to silver allergies in a lot of cases. But so two mouthpieces that are identical but with different surface finishes will feel different. The more slippery it is, the bigger it feels. Just that's the way it is. So there's a little bit of that, if people. But yeah, we've made advances that allow us to do better at mimicking older surfaces. If you're used to that, or you might decide you like a smoother surface and want to keep it smooth, and when it becomes unsmooth, have us re-smooth it or make a new one.
Yeah. So your take is, just to make sure I understood, your position is like, when you copy it, it is the same mouthpiece. And if it feels different, it's not that the mouthpiece itself in terms of the design is different. It could just be surface finish or some other potentially cosmetic thing. So, and like that, those things matter. It's not that it doesn't affect it, but you're very confident that when you copy a mouthpiece and it lines up exactly, that in terms of design, it should play and feel the same.
Yes. And I think we proved this with, our blind taste tests,
Yeah.
Where we'll do things like, we'll move a line around by a tiny amount, 1,000th of an inch or something, and see if people can detect the difference. And generally they can't,
Sure.
So we have sort of an idea of what the tolerance is that we have to hit to be same, and we can hit that. And so, I'm quite confident. Some people just imbue things with magic powers.
Sure. That's, that's,
and it's a little bit of magical thinking, like materials. We've shown that, if people can tell the difference between a plastic mouthpiece and a metal one, but a lot of people can't really tell the difference. Audiences can't tell the difference when they hear it. So
right.
If plastic, if a cheap piece of plastic and a solid piece of metal produce similar sounds, then how can it possibly be that this very slightly different alloy of metal and the other, they're not different?
Yeah.
And to the extent they are, even if they were, the bigger difference, as we say, chase geometry first and then everything else.
Yeah.
So someone who's stuck in but yours is, it feels different because it was made of a magic metal that doesn't exist anymore. It's pre-World War II, so there's not as much uranium from the nuclear test. Before we get into all that nonsense, what about annealing it? Doesn't make a difference. And if it does, it's much, much, much less important. It's a much lower order effect than, does this rim fit me right? Does this cup resonate right? Is this the right throat to moderate between this backbone? Most people are so geometrically suboptimally fit that they need to, that is the higher order of, precedence before they start messing around with magic alloys and so forth.
Well, that is a nice sort of segue into what I was hoping to cover a little bit here. And I think the easiest way to do it is, if someone worked with one of your shamans, almost like, what could they expect? Could they expect to be able to say, I want better range, I want better endurance, my articulation is this, and your shamans would be able to translate that into some suggestions in terms of what your mouthpiece does? Or is it something else? And then if you kind of almost want to give like a generalized, like very quick, we don't have to go into depth, but we have these different parts of the mouthpiece. We have the sort of the outside and then the rim. Like, so there's the I don't know if it's the same thing as the rim, but there's like the outside sort of flat part, and then there's how it comes into the rim. And so that's like the bite or whatever. Then there's the cup, the throat, the back bore. Maybe there's other parts I'm unaware of. But if you kind of want to talk about these two things, maybe we'll start with, if someone was saying to you, I want these changes, but I don't know exactly what would change it, and they're talking to your shamans, can you talk a little bit about what that process would look like?
Yeah, well, so I guess I think I divide all this into two tracks now. There's I'm going to try a kit track, right? And we have a kit for the Class E kit is for sort of all around mouthpieces, and then we have the lead kit for commercial and lead mouthpieces. So I want to try a kit is I want to try certain combinations of things and optimize it. And to me, a shaman can help with that, but so can your teacher or your colleagues,
Right.
listening to you and your feedback. So there is the kit fitting, right? But then there's I want something custom, and so I would draw a line between those. If you're doing a kit fitting, that's one set of things that you would carry to completion until you found your best fit. And if you feel like you're in between two things, then the custom thing would be sort of, figure out how to make it in between size or whatever. Versus, so that's one path. The other path is we want to do a custom thing. And it's hard to generalize because some people come in saying very specifically, I love the rim on this. It's very comfortable, but the sound is pinched and nasal. I love the way this one sounds. And traditionally, you just slice the rim off one and screw it on the other and make them meet with sandpaper, which makes me like all kinds of uncomfortable. And in Ventureland, that's a literally 90-second operation. You scan it away, you scan both of them, and then I do your shaman does digital magic for 90 seconds or better, and then you're done. So that, there's people who know what they want. The people who normally go to a custom maker and say, I want this rim or this backbore or this cup, and then they would do something. That's one sort of shamanry. Another is more like what you said. This is my everyday mouthpiece. It has been for a very long time, but I've noticed I'm struggling more for upper register. Can you help? So maybe I think that's probably more like the question you're asking is, for someone who kind of has some idea what they want to do, there's no one better or faster than us at doing it.
Yeah.
For someone who has feedback about their mouthpiece, complaints, I like this mouthpiece, but, then I think really the way it would go is we would do some sort of history, tell me about not just this mouthpiece, but one or two before it, and or one or two that are in our library that you've played and why you don't like them or why this one that you have now is better than them. And then it just gets down to synthesizing that information and finding a way, a sensible way forward.
Sure.
If someone says it's a range thing, you say, well, there's always a trade-off here, as the upper register gets more focused, the lower register can also be a little bit pinched, whatever, so where do we want to, settle in that trade-off? I think a lot of people use equipment that's not efficient enough for them. So, a slightly shallower cup, slightly more closed throat entrance, smaller throat are things to try. And that's where we might say, okay, well, I might try one or two of these different, a couple gradations shallower. And then I'm probing for, have you tried a shallower mouthpiece? What was too shallow? Oh, I've got one of those scanned. Now let's be in between. Now we've sort of, that's the lower limit. And, we got a decent amount of room between those. How about I print you up 2 gradations of shallower, this and that?
Yeah.
And then we 3D print those and you test those and then you give me feedback. You know what? I want to be right in between those two. Okay, now we've got a bullseye. So usually that's the way it works. If you don't know, oh, I want this rim on this cup on this backboard, and then we just draw it and then it exists. If it's more like, okay, here's my mouthpiece, here's my complaint about it. Or, here's my mouthpiece. It's really great. But when I put it in C trumpet instead of B flat trumpet, here's what happens to my intonation.
Yeah.
And then we have a set of tools, it's a backbore thing. It's a throat thing. Actually, I want to try these 2 different backbores. Oh, you have those backbores and screw backbore. And that's where it gets sort of individualized. Oh, you already have those screw backbores from, whoever. we can 3D print you 2 different tops to test with those. And then, test your 2 different backbores on our 2 different screw tops. That's 4 different tests to do. And tell us which one is best. And you're like, actually, here it is right here. Boom, done. Then it's in metal. Yeah. And then, so it's this sort of, we call them shamans because it's this guided experience, a concierge experience. And it's not necessarily the same for anyone. It depends on where you're starting, what you know and don't know, what you're trying to accomplish. And then it's applying the tools to guide you through. So whether it's, we draw one thing based on what you tell us, and that we're pretty sure is going to work in metal, or we try 2 or 3 exploratory prints, and then you give feedback. And usually we don't go past 2 rounds. You're like, well, based on those 2 prints you made me, blah, 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 and then we say, then the answer is this.
Yeah.
It's in between. It's this one, but with that backboard, and then, we're there.
It's so cool to me. It's like you've turned it into like a science experiment, right? Where the point is not necessarily, the point is obviously to get a mouthpiece that works. But what I really like about this is that it's like you're also learning about what you like and what you don't like. And so it's like I get this deeper understanding of me and how I operate. And then I get this deeper understanding about what facets of my equipment are good for me and what should I avoid. That's like you get all this knowledge along with a mouth. Instead of just like I bought a mouthpiece, it happens to work. It's like I now understand myself and my equipment a little bit more, which I can imagine will only help you moving forward when you need to make other changes or anything like that.
That is exceedingly well said. I'm glad you said it. I promise I didn't script that, people. I did, but that's exactly how I would have told. The knowledge and edification is definitely something that we are selling. And it's hard to monetize that, but I think it is a big part of our value proposition, right? You don't just want a lump of metal, you want all the knowledge behind it.
Right. Yeah. That's what you were saying earlier. Yeah.
And the assurance that if you lose that lump of metal, we can make you another one just like it. And if you're no longer satisfied with it, we can, using all that knowledge that you now have about yourself, evolve it forward. And that's going to happen. It should happen. This whole idea that equipment should be static is ridiculous, because why practice? Why continue to play at all except to grow as an artist? As you grow, you're going to want to hear different things. Your tastes will change. Your tone concept will change. Your body will change. All these things are moving targets, as they should be. That's what art is.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, as you get older, you like sounds that are darker or mellower, or you care more about the middle register. You don't care about scroll, or maybe now you're like, what? Now I want to play lead, or whatever it is that. And then knowing what you know about your equipment, you take all of that and move it forward the same way you do with the rest of your playing. If you decide you've been playing as a soloist for many years, now you want to play lead. Well, you already know how to read music. And you already know how to buzz, and you already, there's lots of stuff and now you just take that knowledge forward and apply it to something else, and that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, I'm all about that. Personally, I'm all about that. I think it's kind of how I've developed when I think about things like orchestral auditions, where I used to be like, I just want to figure out what's the thing that will make me win. But now I'm so much more obsessed with understanding like what styles of preparation lead to what kinds of outcomes. So like I understand the whole thing more deeply, because it'll just make me a better practicer, a better preparer for anything that I'm going to do. So it seems like my value system has shifted over time to become how much can I learn? Like how much can I learn? Like I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to see how much I can learn, and the value be what can I learn? Not necessarily like the thing I get out of that sort of the result, but it's like a journey, right? Rather than a destination. It's that trite saying, but it sounds like that kind of value, people who feel that way would like love what you're doing.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's not a destination. Life is the joy that we get is being on the treadmill. It's doing the thing, and everything that you learn about yourself and about whatever you're doing is applicable to the next time. Like you said, becoming a better practicer. Some people are satisfied just grinding through the same exercises over and over and over, but you hit a ceiling and it's just diminishing returns, and then it's just fighting to hold ground. But what you've learned about the way that you progress and learn music and prepare your body for one audition helps you prepare for a concert or for a recital or another audition or whatever it is. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. This is awesome. I had no idea. This is why I love the podcast, because I feel like I get to know people and actually have a full conversation rather than just trying to get some of the main points. There's another one where you wrote, it's in this sort of company philosophy. It's talking about Vennture believes in continuous improvement. You evolve as a player. We promise to continue evolving as a company. We will update VenCAD. We will add new features. We will try new things. We will sometimes make mistakes or roll out features that nobody uses. But one thing won't change. We'll be obsessive about quality. I'd love for you just to talk about maybe some of the changes that have happened. You could say since you opened your doors and started doing this, or changes that I know you said right now your main focus is figuring out how to get this into the hands of more people, but I'm just curious what has changed. Like, what are some practical applications of that paragraph in your website?
Yeah, I mean, like all of us, we've had a journey, and I would say that one of the principal things that has changed in the last just even year has been we're more committed to our brand than making stuff for other people. A lot of our output over the last 5 years has been manufacturing for other companies, people who design their own line of mouthpieces and want their logo on it instead of ours. And we became a machine shop for some of them. We became a mouthpiece manufacturer for others who wanted finished goods. So some companies want to just machined brass and they want to stamp their name on it and, do a little bit of finishing to it. There are people who wanted to design something and then have their own brand. And I was like, oh, that's just more revenue. But it ended up that the tail was wagging the dog, that those were more of our work than working with customers and, putting our own name on things. And that has, I believe, slowed the adoption of our process and our software and everything that we do. And so we have stepped away from that. And really, just in the last 6 months or a year, we are not doing that as much. We have moved away from that and are now more committed to, we hadn't made a social media post in 2 years because all of our time was cranking out things for other people. And we're like, no, we're going to start doing the thing again. We're going to get back to people and getting our tools out there instead of just being a tool for other companies to use. Because that would deprive people of knowing about us and getting into our thing. And it's just, it's just someone else doing the work of coming up with the design that's fairly static and presenting it to the public, and then we're making it. And I want to get people thinking differently. So that is a big, early on, nobody knows who you are. It's hard to get known. And so we took that easy revenue of other people handing us money to manufacture things on their behalf. And we do have the capability of manufacturing things, and it's useful. It's not easy. It's hard work. Manufacturing something given design is hard work. Mm-hmm. But we realized that our daily, pie chart should be more inclusive of time talking to customers, working with customers, finding shamans to work with customers, creating social media to, all that stuff, the marketing stuff. We're confident in our manufacturing ability. We're confident in all of that. We know how to do it. But rather than just sell that as its own thing, we've decided to pretty much, with few exceptions, use it to service our demand and our customers. And so that is a big thing that's different. As I alluded to earlier, then the other big thing that we did is the 3D printing thing. I had no concept of using, because to me, I didn't view 3D printing as particularly accurate. When I first started the company, so I didn't think about it as a way of making usable mouthpieces. But then I realized that VenCAD is the perfect tool because although 3D printers tend to shrink throats closed, if you measure how much they do that, you can pre-correct for it.
Sure,
And so we can dial. So building that in a few years ago also very much fundamentally changed the way that we did testing. because it went from something that had to be done here under manufacturing conditions to something you could do in your garage. And we have this great, it's exactly what I was hoping for when I came up with the 3D printing. Most of the Vennture 3D prints that are made in the world are not made by me. They're friends helping friends. They're people with cottage industries fitting their friends. One of the guys in the Atlanta Symphony trombone section started 3D printing, and he started printing, and he got obsessed with finding new ideas, and he's handing them out to his section mates. And now there are, people going to Atlanta Symphony services hearing 3D printed mouthpieces of his latest designs. Then one of his colleagues came here to North Carolina to do it to sub, and brought like a shopping bag full of these designs and was handing them out to guys to try. And like that community of designing things, having ideas, friends fitting friends, and then hopefully at the end I get an order for, can you make one of these in metal, please? So moving away from manufacturing as a white label thing for other people and using it simply to service our needs, the 3D printing, and then I guess the third big evolution was the kit designs. I never really wanted a limited number of stock models, but the kits are like not particularly limited. There's still thousands of things to try, and I hadn't really envisioned that as being a thing that I would use. I imagine more just people looking at VenCAD, drawing a thing as I had done with my cases and then ordering it. And although that is a portion of our activity, the kits now, and we've even got them at a couple of retailers, Schmidt Music in Minnesota and Austin Custom Brass, ACB.
That's cool.
We're probably looking at rolling those out to a few more. That too is a learning thing. Some people, when they try a thing, they want to walk out of the store with it. And so these kits, it's a four-piece mouthpiece, and I imagine it's something where you get the fit with the 4-piece, and then you order a 1-piece or a 2-piece made to order. So we're learning how to do that from a not a technology perspective, but a sales and marketing and customer service thing. Those are, I guess, the three big things. The not doing as much white label manufacturing, using 3D printing as a tool, and using fit kits as a tool for getting in the ballpark, or from taking someone from unfit. I had took this. This is something my teacher gave me 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Let me do a complete refit and see where I end up, and then So those are three ways that we have evolved and changed what we've been doing and what our goals are.
That's awesome. I realized I have kind of like one more question to end it, but I realized we missed that question about what do the different parts of the mouthpiece do. Can you answer this like in a semi-brief way, or is it too interconnected to really be able to say, if you change the cup, it does this, and if you change the back bore, it does this? Is it possible to answer that?
Yes, it's possible. And one of my pet peeves is mouthpiece manufacturer gatekeeping. You can't possibly understand all of these things. Yes, you can, and you should. And, shame on manufacturers for making it seem like what they're doing is some dark art. To some extent, yes, things are interrelated, and, other things, things influence things. But people should know what their mouthpiece looks like. They should know what the parts do. And they should have confidence that they can tweak something in a meaningful way without tons of specialized knowledge, because let me tell you, specialized knowledge actually isn't that helpful. I'll tell you why.
If you look at, and I'm going to turn over to VenCAD, but if you imagine a mouthpiece cup, when people's lips, for years, we've been imagining, people trying to discover better designs that are more optimized somehow. If you have a perfect mouthpiece somehow, and a person with different amount of lip intrusion uses it, they completely change the acoustics of it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to know is to test. You can't design an a priori perfect mouthpiece. You just can't. It depends on the person using it, how much swelling they have in their chops, how far they roll in, and what horn they're plugging into. So
sure.
Gatekeeping is out at Vennture. Specialized knowledge is out at Vennture. We give the tools, that you need. So, to make it as simple as I can, the rim is where the thing sits on your face, right?
Do you want to flip it back to you?
Yeah, I'll flip it back. The rim is where the mouthpiece sits on your face, right? People
Yeah.
talk a lot about the inner diameter of the rim as if it's the only number that matters. And I'm here to tell you the whole contour of the rim matters. How flat, how rounded, basically how big, how wide, but also where the high point of the thing sits. And the only way to know what you need is to test some different rims of different sizes and different not just sizes, contours. A lot of manufacturers for a given size, they only have one contour. Something that's flatter or rounder, or, like Schilke has ostensibly 5 different, semi-flat, more flat, rounded, but you don't find them anywhere. So, the contour that works is the one that fits you and allows you to have a good buzz.
Yeah.
And you'll know, if the inner diameter is too small, your articulation will be weird. Your buzz won't be free. It'll be constricted. If it's too big, you'll fall into it, bottom out, not have an upper register, etc. So you got to, that is the trial. Finding the right rim is the trial and error. It's not particularly fun, but once you find it, you write it down.
Yeah,
and you have the file, and you're like, this is my rim. There are many like it, but this one is mine. And that of course is a Full Metal Jacket reference. Right. So once you have the rim that fits your face, we all know deeper cups, darker sound, shallower cups, brighter sound, deeper cups, lower register, shallower cups, emphasize upper register. And so we get into the throat, and the throat, is the primary agent of, resistance to, and a lot of people don't know how much resistance they need because they haven't tried different throats. And that's one of the main things about our kits is try the same exact design and go from the smallest possible throat to biggest possible throat and observe what happens.
Yeah, because I would be under the impression, I think I have been under the impression that the biggest throat possible is the best because it's maximum airflow, right? Like that picture I think I've operated under, but I bet you would say it depends.
Very much so. And it depends because the throat to me is, as I said, a tiny one, you get a lot of back pressure. A huge one, you have a lot of airflow, if you like. It feels very different. Physically speaking, it's not particularly different, but this is very empirical because a very, tight playing trumpet, due to small bore size or other reasons, is going to want a bigger throat and vice versa. The thing that we do as trumpet players is create resistance. We create it sometimes in our throat, which is usually not good, in our chops, in our tongue arch, in our cup, in our, the entrance of the throat, the horn, all the way down. And I imagine as water flowing, over a series of, you don't want one of them all of a sudden be wide open and then the water overflows the next dam. You want it nicely cascading from thing to thing. Again, testing. You find the right throat to get the right amount of back pressure to dial it in. So you're not gripping too much with the chops. You're not pushing against a brick wall. You're sort of balanced. And you know this when it feels natural to buzz, when the sound that you're hearing is the sound you wanted to hear, and so on.
Okay. That makes sense.
And then the back bore, the weird thing about the back bore is the more open it is, especially down near the throat, the more it actually emphasizes higher overtones, not lower. That's an odd thing. And again, the way to get good at these things isn't really by knowing stuff. It's about trying stuff. If you take, and that's why the Classique kit is beautiful. Try the exact same mouthpiece that's pretty close to yours, reasonable match, and then try 3 or 4 different throat sizes and listen and hear what happens. Feel what happens. Go back to the throat size that works best. Now try a few different backbores. Listen, hear what happens. And just, in 20 minutes of work or half an hour of work, you can learn a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Although I will give you one tool here that I have talked about before and that exists in VenCAD, and it's kind of because as you can imagine, a lot of these things you can get from here or from there. You can make something more upper register capable by making the cup shallower or by making the rim, narrower, to support your vibration better, or both.
You can add, openness to the sound by opening up the bottom of the cup or the throat or the backbore, all of the above, and sort of the catch-all for all of those is our pop frequency calculator. And this is hilarious, but well, here's one. It's like, do I have a mouthpiece anywhere? Like, it's kind of, sometimes it's hard to. The way the lead kit came to be is because I realized I hadn't made myself a single mouthpiece in like a year and a half because I've been busy doing stuff for other people. And so I was like, I'm going to design a whole kit of lead oriented stuff because that's what I mainly play. Just because I want to, and that's what I'm doing. Because sometimes, the carpenters or the cobbler's sons do need shoes. But anyway, if you have a mouthpiece, if you smack it with your hand, it makes a pitch. Bum, 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 right? And if you bum, 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 if you sort of figure out what you hum that pitch, that it is a frequency. So some number of hertz, it's some note, right? And in general, the lower the pop frequency, right? You imagine a tuba mouthpiece, or a piccolo mouthpiece, whatever that frequency is, it's a number, and VennCAD can calculate that number for you for any mouthpiece design. And so if you're like, well, as you open up the throat, that pop frequency goes down. As you make the cup shallower, the pop frequency goes up. As you make the backbore more open, the pop frequency goes up, and vice versa, all of those things.
Yeah.
And higher pop frequency is associated with brighter upper register resonant. Lower pop frequency is associated with darker lower register resonant. And so if you're like, well, what if I open the throat by this much and then open the backbore by this much, will they offset? Well, if you dial the one until the pop frequency lines up with the old one, then that's how much it takes to offset what you've done roughly.
That's crazy.
So that's like if you say, okay, I need more, free blowing because this horn is a smaller bore horn. I'm going to open the throat up, but I want to then open the backbore up to compensate, like intonation wise. That's a pretty good first blush way, open the throat the amount you want, then open the backbore until the pop frequency was what it was initially. And that's a way to be kind of in tune.
It's like wild. You can almost like mathematically make these adjustments. It's like with this pop frequency, like obviously that's not something that I was aware of and would never even think to like, what I'm saying? I would never ever think that would be a thing you could measure or use in any viable ways. That's
it
amazing.
Is a thing you can measure. It is a thing you can use, and it actually shows you why. Like for example, if you take a mouthpiece, right, and just lop the end off, lop the last quarter of an inch off, right? Yeah. The pop frequency will go up. That kind of makes sense, right? As you cut the thing shorter, the pop frequency goes up, right? And if you remember, if you drill the throat out, the pop frequency goes down, right? Yeah. So if you drill the throat way out and then slice a bit off the end, you can dial the pop frequency similar to where you started, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And there's a brand name for this. It's Monet or Lotus.
Oh, interesting.
If you've noticed, Monets tend to have bigger throats than others. You'll also notice they're noticeably, you stack them next to a Bach, they're much shorter.
Is that why? I've always wondered how a Monet can get away with like a 14 throat or something like that. I never thought about that. The mouthpiece, it's not the same as having a Bach 1C with a 14
If you drill a Bach 1C out, it would start to play really flat. So what do? You whack off enough shank until you are, it doesn't have to be, hertz for hertz matching. But, if you drop the pop frequency 50 hertz by drilling out the throat, you move it back 30 or 40 or whatever, to get in the ballpark. And that's why that's that way, for example.
Yeah, this is crazy. Like, this is just a Hammond mouthpiece I have. If I do the thing, it's like, so it's like whatever that is. And then this is a Al Hurt Model A jet tone mouthpiece. It's like noticeably higher, and obviously that mouthpiece is the only mouthpiece that allows me to play a double G.
Well,
That's why it's
there
good.
you go. You know, and so, and then you might say, well, you know, how do we make it a little bit less shrill sounding? And so then you know, then we start to open up things. But you know, it's at least it's a touchstone that allows us to sort of adjust a few things and know we're going to be basically in tune or similar to where we started, to keep from having to make infinite prototypes. You know,
That's amazing.
that's a tool. So those are the parts of the mouthpiece, and that's like a sort of catch-all. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a way to approximate whether things are in balance or are as in balance or out of balance as they were before we started making our changes. So
Nice.
there you have it.
That's incredible to know. Obviously, that's outside of my area of expertise. So for me, it's fascinating to like learn this stuff. I would not be a self-professed, quote, like gearhead or whatever, right? Like I just find something that works and I just play on it, and I assume all of the problems are always me. You know what I mean? So it's fascinating to learn about at least where you are at with Vennture and the things that you're thinking about. And you've talked in this interview about where you started and enjoying the design part of things, and sort of seeing an ability to transfer in or shift into doing this for mouthpieces. But you're thinking of yourself like primarily from the engineering design side, not necessarily like the quote musical side, although you have a passion for both of those things, as I've said. And then you're working with shamans and you're helping. There's like so much about this that sounds so cool. I'm curious, for sort of my last question here, for you is the most satisfying part of the work that you do? Is there a part that is the most, because obviously with a job like this, I'm sure there's parts of your job that are like a drudgery, or there are things you don't necessarily look forward to. So I'm just curious what makes it worth it for you, or what's like the most satisfying part. Just kind of curious how you'd answer.
Well, I'll tell you what's the most unsatisfying part. There's all the business stuff, right? Taxes and all that stuff, and accounting, ordering brass and shipping, recyclables. Like there's so much maintaining of the air compressors. There's so much stuff like that drudgery. That's the stuff I don't like.
Yeah.
What I love most, I mean, sure, I like, designing mouthpieces and all that. And it is rewarding to produce actual physical goods. But I would say there's two things that are really special to me. One is when I get to go to performances and hear people playing my gear. That's rewarding. I went to a concert of Wagner music here in with the North Carolina Symphony a few weeks ago, and it was really cool because like 3/4 of the brass section is playing my stuff, and it was really easy for me to comps. So and that was cool. And so I get to take my girlfriend out for a night on the town. We saw the symphony, and and I got to say hi to them all afterwards. And they'd all been into the shop, and they had been making prototypes. They'd been refining their gear. They had been playing my stuff, and they said at least some little bit of what they're doing is made a little bit easier or better thanks to something that I was able to help them with. And that's very rewarding to know that I can be that one little part of it that makes them just that couple of percent more confident and better up there than they would have been. And that's very rewarding. And the other thing that is really rewarding is when I start to see that community happen, when it has nothing to do with me anymore. I've said this before. If you look at mouthpiece companies, they tend to be named after people. Bach, Schilke, Hammond, they're named after. And Vennture, I very intentionally did not name after myself because I think it can be bigger than myself, and it can go. It doesn't need me necessarily. And so when friends help friends, they listen and they exchange ideas, and they come into town with a shopping bag full of 3D prints, and they are testing and having late night practice sessions and jam sessions and talking about gear, and then come up with ideas and then send them in. And it doesn't have anything to do with me. I think that's great. Because that is a way, again, that I can, that's what drew me to automation to begin with. It's not just about what I do. It's about me setting up systems that can help people succeed. Whether it's a machine that someone's using on an assembly line that makes their life easier, or whether it's this set of software and tools and whatever, where one person can apply their knowledge and help their friend, and I don't even have to be there, but yet I can, in some sense, be there in spirit and have created that. I find that just incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, this has been, for me, an incredible conversation. I've learned so much from you, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to just get to know you a little bit and your story. I think the work you're doing is, at minimum, it's interesting, if not inspiring, if not, you know what I mean? Like, you're pushing the boundaries of like where our field is, the field of mouthpiece creation. Like, you're pushing the boundaries, and this will be cool to see where you're at 5 years from now, the kind of innovations you're working with. And so I'm thankful for this opportunity. If somebody's listening to this interview and they want to get in touch with you to say, hey, I loved what you were talking about, thanks for sharing, or they want to, talk about a mouthpiece or get one of these mouthpiece kits, what would be the best way for someone to get in touch with you or someone that could help?
Well, just go to our website, Vennture.mp, 2 N's in Vennture, and MP like mouthpiece. And from there, you can send us, get our email address or our phone number, however you like to communicate. And follow us on social media. We're now trying to be a little bit active with that and keep people informed. So they give us a ring and reach out, and we'll see what we can do to help you out.
That sounds great. Thank you again for your time and educating me and the people listening. I really, really appreciate it. I want to thank Brandon Yoakum for his work on mastering this episode of the podcast. And most importantly, I would like to thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you in the next one.